Hey everybody, it's Mr. Spook. Today we have a special guest, ZakBabyTV, and if you enjoy his narration, you should definitely check out his channel. I will be leaving a link in the description at the top, but without further ado, I hope you enjoy these stories. My two buddies and I went on a hunting trip for bull elk last November, and we were having a great time, to say the least. That, however, soon would change after what we saw on the third day. Now, I'm not one for superstition, and I don't believe in ghosts at all, but what we saw out there really changed my view about those sort of things. The trip started out normally after we parked our trailers at camp. We got there a day early before the hunt officially started so we could settle in and get some scouting done. Only Eric and I had licenses because Brian didn't draw out this year, and he wanted to come along with us anyway. Brian also brought along his German Shepherd named Lucy, which stayed back at the camp with a leash that was connected to a metal spike. The spike was so deep in the ground that I wondered if we'd be able to get it out. I asked Brian and he told me that his dog was so strong that it had to be that deep. I enjoyed playing with Lucy. She was always excited to see me and would greet me by jumping up on my two legs and try to lick my face. Eric, however, was not amused by her and would constantly yell at her to leave him alone. Anyway, the first 2 days we saw so many cow elk in valleys and on the side of the mountains that I thought for sure that we would see some bulls out there, but there was none among them. It wasn't until the third day of the hunt that we saw a bull elk, but it was too far away to take a shot at, and even if we were able to hit it, it would take hours to try to pack that thing out. So that evening, we decided to hunker down next to some fallen trees and were able to watch a hillside. While we were surveying the area, Brian spotted a coyote about 250 yards, walking to a small pond of water strangely as if it was maimed. Eric took out his binoculars to take a closer look, and he started describing it saying, "That coyote, it ain't right looking. It has a hunch on its back like a bear, and its jaw, oh man, its damn jaw seems like it's been broken, and now it's dropping there like a dead fish." "Let me see those binos," I asked curiously with an outreached hand. Eric handed them to me, and as he did, he seemed to grasp his gun tightly. I took them and looked at the animal and said, "You're right, that thing's jaw is just hanging there. Also, did you happen to notice its hair? It's so long and unevenly dispersed." I then handed the binoculars to Brian and he looked at the coyote for 1 second and screamed, "Shh, Brian, shut up. We're hunting," Eric whispered harshly. "What did you see?" I asked as I looked at his shocked facial expression. Brian looked at his feet as he muttered, I saw my dog Lucy, but it wasn't her. I don't know what that was." "It couldn't have been your dog. When I looked at it, it looked like a dying coyote. It didn't have the large black spot on its back or your dog's strawberry red sides and underbelly," I said in a plain yet confused manner. "Well, since we ain't gonna see anything out here cause you screamed like a baby, I'm going to put the coyote out of its misery," Eric said angrily as he raised his rifle and looked through the scope. A large shot followed and we saw the animal drop down soon after. It was a clean kill, and Eric was curious about seeing what was wrong with the animal up close. So he started to get ready to hike out. As he got his stuff together, he said, "You probably just didn't get a good look at it, Brian. Your dog is fine." Brian stood up, and he brushed the dirt off his butt. He replied, "I swear, I saw my dog, but an evil, demented version of it with human eyes. But you guys are probably right. There's no way she could have the strength to yank out the metal stake holding her back at camp. Well, let's go find out the truth about this animal," I said somewhat excitingly, as I started walking towards the dead animal. It took us about half an hour to hike over to it, and we lost sight of the animal's corpse as we passed through some trees. Once we finally got to the spot where the animal had dropped, there was no corpse, just a puddle of blood. However, the blood was blackish and very dense. Eric observed the scene and started to scratch his head as he said, "I could have sworn I shot that thing straight through its heart. There's no way it could have just gone back up and walked off." I had an eerie feeling about the whole situation, and Brian was still afraid that it might have been his dog that got shot. Eric, however, noticed a trail of blood leading into a dark tree line. Without asking, he started to follow it and he loaded his gun. As he did, me and Brian were both freaked out and just watched Eric as he went into the forest. He soon went out of sight, and Brian and I could not leave him here, so we waited. I passed the time by taking a skinny stick and poking at the puddle of blood. It smelled terrible and the aura hit me pretty hard. So much so that my stomach convulsed and I threw up. "You okay?" Brian asked as he put his hand on my back. Before I could answer, there was a loud shot that echoed through the trees, and we both looked at the direction it came from. "Must have found the animal," I said as I spit into the grass. As soon as I said this, we could now see Eric, but he was full on sprinting. "Run!" he screamed as he ran at us. I noticed that he must have dropped his gun because he wasn't carrying it. I was about to ask him what happened, but Brian grabbed my arm and yanked me towards where we had parked the truck. Without hesitation, I ran. We soon made it back to the truck and my shoulder hurt from the rubbing of the gun strap. I looked back at Eric, who slowed down for nothing. I soon looked behind him and saw nothing chasing us. So I opened the truck and got in without worry. Eric then climbed in and told me to hit the gas and go. I was so perplexed on what Eric saw out there, and I knew that he hardly got scared of anything, so this started to freak me out. I started driving fast back to camp and I asked Eric, "What did you see out there that was scary enough to make you drop your gun?" "I don't know, man. That was no damn animal." I followed the trail of blood and it stopped at the base of a tree, and I was wondering how a coyote was able to climb a tree, but when I looked up, I saw this hairy humanoid creature there. It smelled so freaking bad. Eric went on about how scary that thing was, and how he was done with the hunting trip and wanted to go home. We soon pulled into camp and mutually decided that we were going home. I started to pack my things and then felt like something was missing. I then thought to myself, "Lucy? Where's Brian's dog? She usually always is so excited to see us back at camp. She can't stop barking and whining to be set free." As soon as I thought this, Brian started screaming and crying. I ran over to where he was and saw that the dog was gone. However, on further inspection, I noticed what Brian was looking at. Something had pulled out the metal stake in the ground and strung Lucy up on a nearby tree and had skinned her. Brian just could not stop crying, and Eric ran over to see what was wrong and just stood there, jaw dropped and frozen. He then muttered, "She was skinned alive. There's a bunch of bruising caused by struggling around her neck where the collar is." "Shut up, Eric, you ain't helping," I said as I put my shoulder around Brian, who had unstrung his dog's body from the tree. "Skinwalker," Eric said in a low tone of voice as he looked into the distance. He then screamed, "It's a damn skinwalker." I followed his gaze and saw an animal that looked like Lucy, but it had human eyes and a sickly green glazed looking coat of fur. Brian stopped crying and just stood there, eyes locked on the beast. Eric then whispered with his voice quivering, "We all run to the truck on a count of 3. Just leave everything else." Brian and I slowly nodded and agreed to the plan. "Okay. 3, 2, 2, 1, Eric whispered sharply, and we all took off like a pack of gazelles for the truck. We hopped in, and as soon as we did, we saw the skinwalker lunge at us and struck the right side door with such a powerful blow that nearly tipped over the whole truck. It didn't stop me whatsoever, and I drove out of there faster than I ever could have. After that, none of us ever went hunting again in that area. We never even went back to claim our camping trailers and supplies. It was too terrifying to think what happened to Brian's dog could happen to us, and that thing would walk around in our skin. Since that experience, I am now a superstitious person.
This story takes place a couple of years ago when I lived in eastern Arkansas. I live in a small town about an hour away, maybe a little bit less, from the border of Tennessee by Memphis. My family and I were camping at this RV resort at the time. It wasn't my RV, it was my father's, but it was just my parents and my siblings. It's something that we usually do at least once, maybe twice a year as a family. It was a weekend getaway. Nothing out of the norm, like usual. Typical hikes, fishing, and nice campfire tales. And of course, good barbecue. Gotta throw that in there too. The first night was magical as always. Not a cloud in the sky. It was humid, but still had a nice slight breeze that was very enjoyable that I could remember. My dad cooked up burgers for everybody. That and some coleslaw and some baked beans with bacon. Typical, I know, but my dad was a pretty simple guy. As far as I could remember for this story, everything was kosher. Until I had to use the restroom that night. Now, we have an RV that has a restroom, but with my luck, I had to go, and my younger brother was in there for a long time, and I wasn't trying to wake up my parents by arguing with him. Luckily, this RV had some pit-like toilets that were on the property, and it wasn't terribly too far from our spot that we had that weekend. So I said, screw it. I got my shoes and socks on, put on a jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and I went outside. It was pretty chilly that night. I don't remember what time it was exactly that I went outside, but it was colder than I thought it would have been, especially during summertime. I don't want to give too much details, TMI, but I could hold my pee, but there was no way I was waiting to go number 2 up in there with my brother being in there for at least 30 minutes. I had to go, and yeah, I couldn't wait any longer. Once I was outside, I turned on my flashlight, and I started walking in the direction down the dirt path where the bathrooms were located at. With the flashlight in my left hand, my right hand was tucked deep into my sweat jacket pocket in front. I slowly walked in the direction towards those bathrooms. A couple of minutes had passed, and I was in sight of the restrooms. Thank God, I told myself. I don't know how much longer I could pinch this off. Eventually, I started speed walking. I reached the restrooms, got inside, locked the door behind me, and started laying my nest and quickly sat down to relieve myself.
Oh, God, yeah! Oh, yeah!
If that wasn't horrifying enough, the noises came soon after. At this point, I was only thinking to myself, thank God I'm in the restroom. What the hell is outside? I was so terrified, I was even afraid to even open the door. I just sat there in total fright. I swear to you, this is a true story. As silly as it may seem, this is actually what had happened to me. In the middle of the night. It's quite embarrassing in many ways. But it was horrifying to me. I don't know how long I waited inside that frickin' wooden porta potty thing. I was in there at least 15, maybe 20 minutes, heart beating out of my chest. I was so afraid to even move an inch. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to finish my business and to slowly creak open the wooden door and take a peek outside. I remember peeking my head out, looking around. I didn't see anything. It was pitch black out, with a slight breeze that was chilled to the bone. But there was nothing in view from where I was at. Absolutely nothing. I inched my way, little by little, outside of that wooden door. I was still standing on the front wooden porch, afraid to step foot back onto the trail, not knowing where this noise was coming from. Eventually I did, though. I started walking at a slow pace with my flashlight, constantly spinning around and looking behind me with any little sound that I heard whatsoever. I was completely freaked out. It seemed like the closer I was getting back to the RV, the more I felt like I was seriously being watched. I heard a snapping noise somewhere far off behind me. I turned around, shined my flashlight, and that's when I saw the red eyes. The red eyes of this large black silhouette behind some trees about 30 yards, maybe less. It had its head tilted with pointy ears. That's all I could make out in the darkness. I couldn't really truly see its full figure and everything with the flashlight that I had. But what I did see scared me to death. I remember screaming, turning around, and running as fast as I could back to our RV, not giving two craps if I woke anybody else up. In fact, I was hoping I did. I got back to the RV. I told my family everything. I couldn't sleep that night. But I refused to ever go back to that camping site ever again. I'm from Alabama. I've been here most of my life, even though now that I'm sending you this story via email, I no longer reside in the South. I was out camping with my family when I was 14 years old. I still remember this day. I'm only 21 now, and I'm in college, but those 6 or so years ago, I remember it like it was last week. We were camping over at Clear Creek Campground, which is in Jasper. It's a beautiful, family-friendly, pet-friendly location. The lake that's out there is awesome. People go tubing out there, people go fishing, they lounge on some inner tubes. There's some cute hiking trails out there, and there's some beautiful locations for RV camping. To be honest with you, before this occurrence took place, this was my favorite place to go camping with my family growing up. I remember it was just a typical afternoon when we had arrived at our spot and everyone started unloading all the stuff from the RV onto the picnic table and outside on the dirt. My dad had reserved this beautiful spot. It was really close to the lake. The weather was nice, partly cloudy, and it had a slight breeze. It was really a magnificent day that I could remember. Our dog was just running around, chomping away, playing around, running in circles, and messing with my younger siblings. I remember we were hiking that day. It was nice. There was quite a few other people also hiking on that same trail, as from what I could remember, the camping location was pretty packed. I don't remember seeing too many open spots that weekend. After we finished our hike, we got back and it was time for an early dinner. My dad never wanted to cook when it was getting dark because he felt like he was being rushed on the grill. And that's one thing my father hated most of all, was to be rushed when it came to barbecuing. We had plenty, and I mean plenty of firewood that we had brought with us, that we had stacked up next to the metal fire pit that was right there by the picnic table. We had lanterns that were on the table as well, hung around a couple of the neighboring trees that were on our camping site. That way there was plenty of light if needed. Once the fire was going after we had finished our meal for that night, we all sat around in lawn chairs and just goofed around telling ghost stories and sipping on sodas. Everything was perfect. That was until we all started hearing the howling noises. Now, I'm native to Alabama, so I know a wolf or a coyote when I hear one. Alabama really doesn't have too many wolves, red or gray ones per se, but they're pretty rare. We have plenty of scavenging coyotes, I know that much. But those didn't sound like coyotes at all. I even asked my father and mother about it, and they just sat there gripping the edges of their lawn chair arms and just wide-eyed, just listening and looking all around. I was freaking out for one, and then I freaked out even more just how they were looking and acting. It wasn't like my dad to get spooked like that. He was in the army. Nothing spooked him. I remember my dad just swigging off his beer and stepping up from the lawn chair. I remember him telling us, "You kids just go inside. It's time for bed." I remember trying to fight him, but there was no point. Me and my brothers and my younger sister, we all followed suit and went inside the RV and shut the door behind us. I don't remember how long my parents were outside talking. We were all definitely watching our parents from outside the window trying to be all sneaky, but it almost seemed like they were arguing. Eventually we got bored and we started doing our own thing. My parents came inside and they had a long talk with us about nature and the risks and just animals being in their natural habitat, and we need to respect nature and everything that lives amongst it. The typical speech that you usually get from your parents. Fast forward that night, everyone is asleep. I woke up completely dry-mouthed. I mean, cotton-mouthed. I was dying for some water. I don't know about everyone who's listening, but this happens all the time. I'm assuming I'm a snorer. Actually, I've been told I am a snorer. And I definitely sleep with my mouth open. So I'm assuming that's the reason why I'm always thirsty half the time when I wake up in the middle of the night or in the early morning. So that night I woke up completely cotton-mouthed. I slowly got out of my bed, not trying to wake anybody else up, as, the RVs are pretty tight quarters and I didn't want to wake anyone else up. I walked over to the kitchen section, grabbed a cup, and I started filling up some water from the sink. As I stood there filling up my water, I was still half asleep, but I was staring out the window that was in front of the sink. And that's when I saw it. I saw this large, blackish figure with glowing red eyes. They looked red to me, at least. Again, I was half asleep. At first, I thought I was seeing something, but I rubbed my eyes and... no, that sucker was there. It was pretty far off, but it was right there at the edge of our camping spot. Probably a good 25 feet or so. Maybe a little less. I don't know. But it was just standing there, on its back legs, breathing heavily with its black fur. But it was standing on its back legs, completely still outside of its chest that was breathing in and out heavily. It didn't move a muscle. It was completely like a shadow or something. But I could tell it was some kind of dog. A big one. It freaked me the hell out. I got away from the window, right after that. I basically downed my water and sat down there on the kitchen floor for a while trying to catch my breath, still not trying to wake anybody else up. I eventually stood back up and peeked over through that window again, and it was gone. Whatever the hell I saw completely vanished within like a minute. I don't know what I saw, but I talked to my father about it the next morning. He told me not to worry about it. I've done some research since then, and I'm pretty darn sure I saw a dog man outside our RV window.
This past October, I had worked at a haunt, that is, a haunted attraction at a local theme park. I was pretty good at managing the big crowds, but what I really enjoyed was when the crowds would get smaller, and groups of 10 to 20 people were coming into my attraction. During times when the crowds were thin like that, I loved scaring them with stories and legends I knew about, and one of my favorite legends to tell them were the Skinwalker legends. I would start off greeting the group and tempting them with the offer to tell them all a story, asking them if they would like to hear a local legend. As we live in the desert, and this haunt was tucked away in the heart of miles of desert land. When they would agree, I would start my tale. Some of you may know about Skinwalkers, and for those of you that do, you might know that native Navajo and Hopi tribes are fearful to even speak of this creature, or to even utter its name. These monsters span from southern Arizona all through to New Mexico and the Mexican border, and across the lands of the native people. The Navajo believe them to be witches or shaman, an evil being with supernatural power to shapeshift, typically by wearing the skin or masks of the animal they wish to walk as, a practice which is looked down upon by the Navajo people. This power is gained after killing a close relative or sibling, and imbues the being with many dark powers. The animal they appear as, however, always looks wrong. A deer or coyote that stands on its hind legs and walks as a man does. A crow or owl, or has a face or eyes that look too human to belong to the animal they mimic, and that glow in the red moonlight. In all the legends, it says there is always one sure way to identify a skinwalker. A skinwalker, no matter what, will never be able to move as the creature it appears as in its animal form. Skinwalkers are able to do other things as well. They can move at seemingly impossible speeds, and can mimic the voice of people, crybabies, your friends, or loved ones. Voices you would trust. They will lure you out into the forest or into the pitch black of the nighttime desert, and once they have you isolated, and you lay your eyes upon their face, it is said you will die an agonizing death. Skinwalkers can curse people and cause them great suffering. Often, it is said they use a mixture that some call corpse powder when seen in their human form, which turns your tongue black and causes violent convulsions until you die. The worst part about skinwalkers, the reason native people dare not to speak of it, it is believed that a skinwalker is capable of reading your minds, and the more aware of them you are, the more aware they become of you. So try not to think about it, but if on your ride home you see a coyote in your path, or hear the drums of native people echoing loudly through the darkness, take care to drive quickly, and pray it will not pursue you. And I would, almost always, be met with looks of horror and fear. It was my absolute favorite tale to tell for this reason. I would tell this story over and over, to as many groups as I could. It wasn't a good idea to talk about them. I would say as much with each recounting of the legend. surrounded by inky blackness that engulfed everything the park's lights didn't illuminate. But I did. I felt safe. Nothing would happen to me. It was just a legend. That was until I drove home after my shift. Around 1 a.m, after a night of telling this particular story dozens of times to guests. As I drove through the twists and turns of the pitch-black mountainous desert road I traveled each night to go home, my high beams on, penetrating the darkness just enough for me to see the road and the first layer of brush on either side of it. My headlights shone on an animal, a coyote. At first, I thought it was the angle the light had hit it at that made it appear to have no tail. But as I continued driving, I encountered the animal again, 3 times, each within several miles of each sighting. A distance any normal animal wouldn't have been able to make, especially when running against a car going 65 miles per hour for most of the journey. Each time I would scan the road for wildlife, and I would see it, there, just outside the darkness, the coyote with no tail, staring at me from the side of the road. My stomach churned a bit, and I breathed deep, trying to tell myself I was just imagining things. The coyotes had tails, and none of them were the same animal. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But I knew deep down, I was just lying to myself. I knew I was wrong. I knew it was real, and it was terrifying. I'm relieved to say I made it home safe that night, but still, every now and then when I drive through the desert in the darkness of night, or glance out my bedroom window into the blackness, I can see that coyote, that skinwalker. I hope it never decides I know too much, but I think maybe, just maybe, it visits me to remind me of its presence. That it wants me to continue telling this story, to continue spreading awareness of their presence, so that I can claim the lives of those who are weak-minded enough to fall prey to it. And now that you know the story, maybe it will come after you.